Hi, it's Heather. I'm a certified arborist in Bloomington, Indiana. And today I thought we'd do a follow up on pruning for safety in trees. So, yeah, I missed the light, and so I'm in front of a tree in the painting. But, anyway, so just some extra things in planning for safety. So the other day we were talking about ash trees and how they are a opposite budded tree, meaning that they will develop two branches. Well, technically three, because they'll have a growing point, but they'll have two lateral branches at one node. So when we're pruning pruning trees that are opposite budded, we don't want to remove more than one branch per node. Um, so the reasons for that would be, if you remove both side branches at one time, that's two places at one node where decay can get in. And also, just since the wood that is at a node, like we were talking about, that is not the same, it's not as it's different than sapwood. And so by removing both of those branches at the same time, we can weaken the rest of the branch. So, um, and that kind of goes into pruning dose, which is, the amount of pruning we're going to do at one time. So a lot of times, especially when we're training trees, um, we don't get to do everything all at once. There's a process to planning for a well-shaped and well-structured tree. Um, okay. So, don't limb up a tree uh, too much all at once. Um, and when we do limb up, it's good to do a little pruning in the remaining canopy for reducing wind resistance. And we don't want to prune in the canopy by removing larger branches, but we can remove some secondary branches, like branches that grow from the top of a branch or the bottom of a branch. Those are branches that would add to wind resistance. And so, if we do need to limb up a tree for clearance, or vista pruning. This is why I say be careful with those two reasons for pruning. We do want to include a little bit of pruning for wind resistance. I had a tree company prune some walnut trees at a friend of mine's house. I recommended them. And I showed up and they had just totally overly pruned or limbed up all the walnuts that were growing in full sun, out in the open. And they were very full trees. And, I just thought, But sure enough, every single tree in the open failed. And, so I should have just in the first place. But anyway, so, when we limb a tree up, we're raising the center of gravity, basically. So, with the lower branches, it was down here. And so, that's where the force of the wind was. There's less kind of cantilever action happening. And so that's why we want to reduce a little bit, just to reduce wind resistance. So then, so back to pruning dose. In Ed Gilman's book, An Illustrated Guide to Pruning, he talks about pruning dose. And so basically, trees are kind of like us. The older we get, the harder it is to form a response to injury. And so the older a tree gets, the less we can remove at one time. A younger tree, say like a nursery grown tree that might be a street tree, um, he mentions, sometimes having to remove up to 60% of the canopy because quite often nursery grown trees come with too many branches to be able to allow for good structure. Um, and so then when we have like, an older tree, and also depending on what kind of tree, like beeches, beeches do not callus well after X number of years, or, the size of the branch. We want to keep any pruning on beeches to a smaller size. We don't want to be making large cuts on beeches because they don't callus well. But also just in general, any tree, like a mature 300-year-old oak, we don't want to be making big cuts or, it's better to keep our pruning to the outside of the canopy, back in the smaller branches and secondary limbs. That can really reduce, especially in things like oak trees, we can reduce, them get a chance for oak wilt. Anyways, so yeah, and it just, think about, when we start training trees earlier, we can be making smaller cuts. And if we train them correctly, we can always be making smaller cuts. We can really reduce the amount of big cuts we make. It's much less stressful for the tree. It's also less expensive. So unless you're on a much older tree and we need to prune either with a bucket truck or climbing gear. So anyway, so we can prune heavier on younger trees, and we must prune lighter on older trees, as well as, well, let's just try and keep pruning cuts small. It's just better. Also the proper timing. So for this, if you're not in Bloomington, Indiana, I would recommend just kind of using your extension office or your land grant colleges to find out when is the optimal time to prune certain trees in your area. There's, where I live, there's a lot of trees that we can prune just about any old time. And thank goodness for that. But there are some, like oaks. We have a very small window for pruning oaks if we want to avoid disease. So oaks, like for here, I think we can start pruning the middle of December, and we might go to the first week of February, maybe. We can also avoid diseases, say like in rose family members, like apples and pears, hawthorns, and so we can either prune those from, say, like the end of January to early March, or wait until, say, like the middle of August until through September. I'm like the queen of avoidance. I avoid dogwood borer moth by pruning in like the middle of uh, waiting to prune until the middle of June. And also with dogwoods by pruning them earlier so that we're only taking smaller wood. Um, we can avoid having larger wounds open because dogwoods are another tree that don't callus well the older they get. So we want to keep our pruning cuts small on dogwoods as well. Let's see. Um, so we want to think about the effects gravity has on trees. We deal with gravity all the time. We get this, but trees also, especially their lower long branches. Sometimes you'll have a maple that has a very long lower branch. And if you look at them, you might notice sometimes that they've developed like an oval cross section. And what that is reaction wood. It's reaction to gravity and also probably a little bit of wind force. So the longer a branch is, the more cantilever action it's going to have in the wind. So by on our very longest branches, we can, coming from the end of the branch, we can prune back to some branches closer in. What we don't want to do is lighten the load of a branch by starting at the trunk. When we start at the trunk and remove branches, what we've done there is shift the area of force out to the end of the branch, which is actually going to increase wind force. So, and that's called lion tailing. So, by doing reduction cuts where we start at the end of a branch and bring it back to, a well directioned branch further in, we can help lighten the load. We can also take a couple, from the middle of the branch, but we don't want to do too much. So just to take a little bit of weight off. So then another practice that can affect the safety of a tree is not pruning, but it's about planting. So, we know we want to have a well-planted tree because it's going to take off better, it's going to have less problems. But what we don't want to do is tightly stake a newly planted tree. I will give you the one thing. It's hard to avoid staking a bare root tree. I would use a figure-8 knot and like a bamboo stake on a bare root planted tree. But when we avoid tightly staking a tree, so the trunk is tied to a stake. When we avoid that, what we can do is allow some movement in the trunk. And it's that movement back and forth, the reaction to wind that actually develops the root flare of the tree. So that's where our buttress strength comes from. Those, when you see, the trunk come down and then the roots come out like that. So when a tree doesn't develop, a good root flare, it can be prone to breakage there. Yeah, and it doesn't develop the buttress strength to be able to withstand wind. So anyway, that would be kind of the first step to having A safe tree is either you can stake the root ball, or and also I will say, if you plant a balled and burlap tree, I don't plant a lot of them anymore. I plant all container grown trees. Um, but if you plant a balled and burlap tree, you really shouldn't have to stake it anyway, unless it's in a very windy area, like a pine tree in a very windy area, something that has a lot of drag to it. Um, but if it's just kind of a normal situation, doesn't get a lot of wind, and you shouldn't have to stake it. So just keep an eye on it, and you might put 3 stakes around it just in case you do need it, since that soil will be all ready for it, and use a flat strap to do this, to connect the tree to the stake. I did this video before, but it was on the camera thing, and I got all the way through without any brain farts, and so like now I hit the video play button and I'm farting. But anyway, so then the final thing on safety is safety for you. So if you're going to be using a pulse saw, if you're going to be on a ladder, make sure you're wearing a helmet. Also, where I was standing in the first safety video, there weren't any trees over me. There were, a lot of trees behind me, but and it was at my house, so I wasn't wearing a helmet. But always kind of know where you're working. Are there any hangers up, limbs up there? Are there any dead branches? Kind of be aware of your situation, and make sure you get a helmet. So anyway, I would like to thank everyone who watched the first safety video. It's so important, and you just made my day. So anyway, if you think about it, maybe like the video or even subscribe. We got a new subscriber today, yay! And we'll get back to the list on reasons for pruning next time. Thanks. Have a great day.